Chapter 40. Cover the land in gold. Of all the places Sudatta visited, none was more beautiful and peaceful than the park which belonged to Prince Jeta. Sudatta felt sure that he could acquire this park. It would serve as the perfect place from which the Buddha's way of awakening could be spread to all corners of the kingdom. Sudatta went to see Prince Jeta and found him entertaining a palace official. Sudatta respectfully greeted both of them and then expressed directly his hope that the prince would sell him the park to provide a practice centre for the Buddha. Prince Jeta was only 20 years old. The park had been a gift the previous year from his father, King Pasenadi. The prince looked at the palace official and then at Sudatta and replied, "My royal father gave me the park. I'm very attached to it. I would only part with it if you agree to cover every inch of it in gold coins." Prince Jeta was speaking in jest. He certainly wasn't prepared for the young merchant to take him seriously. But Sudatta responded, "Agreed, I'll meet your price. Tomorrow I will have the gold brought to the park." Prince Jeta was startled. "But I was only joking. I do not want to sell my park. Don't bother bringing the gold." Sudatta answered with resolve, "Honourable Prince, you are a member of the royal family. You must carry out the words you have spoken." Sudatta looked at the palace official drinking tea for support. "Is that not so, Your Excellency?" The official nodded. He turned to the prince and said, "The merchant Anathapindika speaks the truth. If you hadn't actually quoted a price, it would be different, but you cannot withdraw your offer now." Prince Jeta submitted, but he secretly hoped Sudatta would not be able to meet his price. Sudatta bowed and departed. Early the next morning, Sudatta sent great carts of gold coins and had his servants spread it over the entire park. Prince Jeta was astounded when he saw the great mounds of gold. He understood that this had been no ordinary business agreement. He asked himself why anyone would give so much gold for one park. This Buddha and his Sangha must be truly extraordinary for the young merchant to go to such lengths. The prince asked Sudatta to tell him about the Buddha. Sudatta's eyes shone as he spoke about his teacher, the Dharma and the Sangha. He promised that he would bring Venerable Sariputta to meet the prince the following day. Prince Jeta found himself moved by the things Sudatta told him about the Buddha. He looked up to see that Sudatta's men had already spread gold coins over 2/3 of the forest. Just as a fourth cart was arriving, he held out his hand and stopped them. He said to Sudatta, "That is enough gold. Let the remaining land be my gift. I want to contribute to this beautiful project of yours." Sudatta was pleased to hear this. When he brought Sariputta to meet the prince was impressed by the bhikkhu's peaceful bearing. Together they went to visit the park, which Sudatta had decided to call Jetavana, or Jeta Grove, in honour of the prince. Sudatta suggested to Sariputta that he live at Jetavana to help direct the building of the monastery. He said his family would bring food offerings to Sariputta each day. Together Sudatta, Sariputta and the prince discussed building huts, a Dharma hall, a meditation hall and bathrooms. Sudatta expressed a wish to build a 3-tiered gate at the forest entrance. Sariputta contributed a number of helpful suggestions regarding setting up the monastery, as he was now well experienced in such matters. They selected an especially cool and tranquil spot to build the Buddha's thatched hut. They oversaw the making of pathways and the digging of wells. The city people soon heard how Sudatta had paved the forest in gold in order to purchase it from the prince. They learned that a monastery was being built to welcome the Buddha and his Sangha, who would soon arrive from Magadha. Sariputta began to give Dharma talks at Jetavana, and the number of people who attended grew daily. Though none of the people had yet met the Buddha, they all felt drawn to his teaching. 4 months later, the monastery was nearly completed. Sariputta set off for Rajagaha in order to lead the Buddha and the bhikkhus back to Jetavana. He met them in the streets of Vasali. Several hundred bhikkhus clad in saffron robes were begging in the streets. He learned that the Buddha and the bhikkhus had arrived in Vasali only a few days previously and were dwelling nearby at a great forest. The Buddha asked about preparations in Savati, and Sariputta recounted how well things were going. The Buddha told Sariputta that he had left Kondana and the Uravela Kassapa in charge of the community at Bamboo Forest. Of the 500 bhikkhus presently with the Buddha in Vasali, 200 would remain to practice in the vicinity. The remaining 300 would accompany him on the journey to Kosala. The Buddha told Sariputta that Ambapali had invited the entire Sangha for a meal offering the next day. The day after that, they would depart for Savati. Ambapali was happy for the chance to offer the Buddha and his bhikkhus a meal in her mango grove. She only regretted that her son Jivaka was unable to attend because of his medical studies. A curious thing happened the day before she was to serve the Buddha and his bhikkhus a meal. On her way home from the visit to the Buddha, her carriage was stopped by several princes of the Licchavi clan. They were the most powerful and wealthiest lords in Vasali and travelled in handsome, elegant carriages. They asked her where she was going, and she replied she was on her way home to prepare to receive the Buddha and his bhikkhus the following day. The young nobles suggested she forget about the Buddha and invite them instead. The princes said, "Invite us, and we will pay for the meal with 100,000 pieces of gold." They were certain that hosting a monk could not possibly be as amusing or profitable as entertaining themselves. Ambapali was not interested. She replied, "It is clear you do not know the Buddha, or you would not speak in such a manner. I have already made arrangements to invite the Buddha and his Sangha. Even if you offer me the entire city of Vasali and all the land surrounding it, I would refuse. Now, if you please, let me pass. I have much to do to prepare for tomorrow." Taken aback, the Licchavi nobles let her pass. Little did Ambapali know that after their encounter with her, they decided to go and see their teacher, who was so highly respected by Ambapali. They left their carriages at the entrance to the great forest and walked in. The Buddha could tell that these young men possessed many seeds of compassion and wisdom. He invited them to be seated, and he told them about his own life and search for the way. He told them about the path to overcome suffering and realize liberation. He knew they belonged to the same warrior caste he had belonged to, and looking at them, he could see himself as a young man. He spoke to them with warm understanding. Their hearts were opened by the Buddha's words. They felt they could see themselves for the first time. They understood that wealth and power were not enough to bring them true happiness. They knew they had found a path for their lives. They all asked to be accepted as lay disciples. They also asked if they could offer the Buddha and his Sangha a meal the next day. The Buddha said, "We have already been invited by Ambapali for tomorrow." The young nobles smiled, remembering their encounter with Ambapali. "Then allow us to offer you a meal on the following day." The Buddha smiled his acceptance. Ambapali invited all her relations and friends to the mango grove the next day. She invited the Licchavi nobles as well to hear the Buddha offer teaching. The day after, the Buddha and 100 bhikkhus ate in the prince's palace. They were served elegant and refined vegetarian dishes that had been prepared with the utmost skill and care. The princes also offered the bhikkhus jackfruit, mangoes, bananas, and rose apples, freshly picked from their own orchards. When the meal was finished, the Buddha spoke about dependent co-arising and the Noble Eightfold Path. He touched everyone's heart with the teaching. 12 young nobles asked to be ordained as bhikkhus. The Buddha happily accepted them. They included Ottada and Sunakata, 2 princes who wielded a great influence in the Licchavi clan. When the meal and teaching were completed, the Licchavi nobles entreated the Buddha to come dwell in Vasali the following year. They promised to build a monastery in great forest where several hundred bhikkhus could dwell. The Buddha accepted their proposal. Ambapali visited the Buddha early the next morning. She expressed her desire to offer the mango grove to the Buddha and his Sangha. The Buddha accepted her gift. Shortly afterwards, the Buddha, Sariputta, and 300 bhikkhus headed north for Savati. Chapter 41. Has anyone seen my mother? The road to Savati was now familiar to Sariputta, because he and Anathapindika had nourished people's interest in the Buddha and the Sangha. They were greeted warmly wherever they went. At nights the bhikkhus rested in the cool forest along the banks of the Sharavata river. They travelled in 3 groups. The Buddha and Sariputta led the first group. The second group was headed by Asaji. The third group was under the guidance of Moggallana. The bhikkhus maintained peaceful serenity as they walked. Sometimes local people gathered in the forests or along the riverbanks to listen to the Buddha's teaching. The day they arrived in Savati, they were greeted by Sudatta and Prince Jeta, who took them to the monastery. Seeing how well planned Jetavana was, the Buddha praised Sudatta. Sudatta responded by saying it was all thanks to the ideas and labour of Venerable Sariputta and Prince Jeta. Novice Rahula was now 12 years old. Though he had been assigned to study under Sariputta's guidance, Sariputta had been gone for 6 months, and so Moggallana had taken his place. At Jetavana, Rahula could resume his studies with Sariputta. Prince Jeta and Sudatta arranged a reception immediately after the Buddha's arrival. Prince Jeta had come to deeply admire the Buddha through his contacts with Venerable Sariputta. They invited all the local people to come to hear the Buddha speak on the Dharma. Many came, including Prince Jeta's mother, Queen Malika, and his 60-year-old sister, Princess Vajiri. After hearing about the Buddha for months, everyone was most anxious to see him in person. The Buddha spoke about the 4 Noble Truths and the Noble Eightfold Path. After hearing the Dharma talk, the Queen and Princess felt their hearts open. They both wanted to become lay disciples, but did not dare to ask. The Queen wanted to first seek the approval of her husband, King Pasadadi. She was sure that in the near future, the king would meet the Buddha and share her feelings. Pasadadi's own sister, who was King Bimbisara's wife, had already taken the 3 refugees with the Buddha 3 years before. Many important religious leaders in Savati also attended the Buddha's discourse that day. Most came out of curiosity rather than a desire to learn anything, but several of them felt their hearts suddenly illuminated when they heard the Buddha speak. Others saw him a worthy opponent who challenged their own beliefs. Everyone agreed his presence in Savati was a significant event in the spiritual life of Kosala. When the reception and Dharma talk were over, Sudatta respectfully knelt before the Buddha and said, "My family and I, together with all our friends and relations, offer Jetavana monastery to you and your Sangha." The Buddha said, "Sudatta, your merit is great. Thanks to you, the Sangha will be protected from sun and rain, wild animals, snakes, and mosquitoes. This monastery will draw bhikkhus from all 4 directions, now and in the future. You have supported the Dharma with all your heart. I hope you will continue to devote yourself to practicing the way." The next morning, the Buddha and the bhikkhus went into the city to beg. Sariputta divided the bhikkhus into 12 groups, each numbering 15. The presence of the saffron-robed monks further aroused the people's interest in the new Jetavana monastery. The people admired the calm and quiet manner of the bhikkhus. Once a week, the Buddha gave a Dharma talk at Jetavana. Great numbers of people attended. Thus, it was not long before King Pasadadi was well aware of the impact of the Buddha's presence. He was too busy with political affairs to visit the Buddha himself, but he listened to many members of his court speak about the new monastery and the bhikkhus from Magadha. During a family meal, the king brought up the subject of the Buddha. Queen Malika informed him of Prince Jeta's contributions to the monastery. The king asked the prince to tell him about the Buddha, and the prince recounted all he had seen and heard. The prince said that if the king granted permission, he wished to become a lay disciple of the Buddha. King Pasenadi had a hard time believing that a monk as young as the Buddha could have achieved true enlightenment. According to the prince, the Buddha was 39 years old, the same age as the king. The king speculated that there was no way that the Buddha could have attained a higher state than such elderly spiritual teachers as Puruna Kassapa, Makali Gosala, Niganta Nataputta, and Sanjana Palataputta. Although the king would have liked to believe his son, he had his doubts. He decided that when an occasion arose, he would go and meet the Buddha himself. The rainy season was approaching, and the Buddha decided to spend it at Jetavana. Thanks to the experience gained during previous rainy seasons at Bamboo Forest, the Buddha's senior disciples organized the retreat with ease. 60 new bhikkhus joined the community in Savati. Sudatta also introduced many friends who became lay disciples and enthusiastically supported the activities of the monastery. One afternoon, the Buddha received a young man whose face was lined with grief and misery. The Buddha learned that the man had recently lost his only son, and for several days has stood in the cemetery crying out loud, my son, where have you gone?" The man was unable to eat, drink, or sleep. The Buddha told him, "In love there is suffering." The man objected, "You are wrong. Love doesn't cause suffering. Love brings only happiness and joy." The bereaved man abruptly left before the Buddha could explain what he had meant. The man wandered aimlessly about until he stopped to chat with a group of men gambling in the street. He told them of his encounter with the Buddha. The men agreed with him that the Buddha was mistaken. "How can love cause suffering? Love brings only happiness and joy. You're right. That monk Gautama was wrong." Before long, news of this story spread throughout Savati and became a subject for heated debate. Many spiritual leaders contended that the Buddha was wrong about love. This matter reached the ears of King Pasenadi, and that evening during the family meal, he said to the queen, "The monk the people call Buddha may not be as great a teacher as the people seem to think he is." The queen asked, "What makes you say that? Has someone said something bad about teacher Gautama?" "This morning I heard some palace officials discussing Gautama. They said that according to him, the more you love, the more you suffer." The queen said, "If Gautama said that, it is undoubtedly true." The king retorted impatiently, "You shouldn't speak like that. Examine things for yourself. Don't be like some small child who believes everything the teacher says." The queen said no more. She knew that the king had not yet met the Buddha. The next morning she asked a close friend, the Brahmin Nalijanka, to visit the Buddha and ask him whether or not he had said that love was the source of suffering, and if he had, to explain why. She asked her friend to note carefully everything the Buddha said and report back to her. Nalijanka went to see the Buddha and asked him the queen's question. The Buddha responded, "Recently I heard that a woman in Savati lost her mother. She was so grief-stricken that she lost her mind and has been wandering the streets asking everyone, 'Have you seen my mother? Have you seen my mother?' I also heard about 2 young lovers who committed suicide together because the girl's parents were forcing her to marry someone else. These 2 stories alone demonstrate that love can cause suffering." Malijanga repeated the Buddha's words to the Queen Malika. One day, soon after that, she caught the king in a moment of leisure, and she asked him, "My husband, do you not love and cherish Princess Vajari?" Indeed I do, answered the king, surprised by the question. If some misfortune befell her, would you suffer? The king was startled. Suddenly he saw clearly that the seeds of suffering exist within love. His sense of well-being was replaced with worry. The Buddha's words contained a cruel truth which greatly disturbed the king. He said, I will go visit this monk Gautama as soon as I have a chance. The queen was happy, for she was confident that once the king met the Buddha, he would understand how extraordinary the Buddha's teaching was. And that is the close of our reading for the moment, dear friends.